Hello, insatiable listeners. Allie here. I want to let you know about my A Path Forward workshop that I'll be presenting live in the cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York, and Denver. Traditional goals like lose 30 pounds or cut out sugar do not work for the seasoned dieter. What those do is it gives you more rules, more restriction, and more rebellion, and that gives all the power to the food. In A Path Forward workshop, you will learn your one true goal that gives you the power and enables you to achieve your health and weight loss goals. I hope you'll join me in these live workshops as I'd love to meet so many of you in person. Visit my website, allieshapiro.com, A Path Forward workshop for all the details and to sign up. I can't wait to meet you. The real question that I want to ask them is, why are you someone that gets triggered by food? Not how do I keep trigger foods away? How do I manage trigger foods? Taking the power away from food and putting it back on you.
For example, nighttime eating, right? It might not even be a trigger, like trigger foods per se, but they have an uncontrollable sensation where like every night they snack and it's a perpetual state of knowing that they're doing this thing that they shouldn't do, but they can't get out of it, the cycle.
You know battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. And wouldn't you know, you bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on this beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster, but for those insatiable, that's your prime time to thrive. We're here to say yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your co-host, Allie Shapiro, a health coach who helps people end the losing battle of dieting and find a truce with food.
And I'm Juliette Berg, nutritionist, fitness expert, and the co-owner of Unite Fitness Studio franchise.
Welcome to episode 64. What do I do about trigger foods? Do you find that certain foods are a gateway for you? You can't just have one? Why are there certain foods that trigger us? And they are not carrots and green smoothies. In today's episode, we talk about the key questions to ask yourself that will enable you to finally be around your trigger foods and not eat them. There is a physical and emotional component that we have to take into account, and we want to teach you how.
All right, Juliette. Trigger foods. That's what we're talking about today. And should you have them in your house? Should you have all of them in your house? How do you get away from trigger foods?
What is a trigger food? Some of us might not even know what that is. This topic came out of a conversation that I was having with a client recently. And I'm sure, Allie, this happens all the time when you meet with new clients, is that they mention that there are certain foods that they can't have around them because if they do, they will consume all of it. And that is what we are saying is a trigger food, something that you feel like you have an uncontrollable sensation around and you have to just eat it all and you can't stop yourself.
Yeah, or you can't have like one bite. Or like once you eat it, my clients will often say, it sets me off.
Yes.
Yeah.
The gateway
drug. So from a lot of people, it's like chips. Other people, it's like carbs, like muffins and brownies. I know for me, when I was, binging and stuff, it was like anything at nuts to you.
Peanut butter, almond butter. That's a big one for people.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The nut butters are for sure. So I think one of the things when we tackle this is we need to be asking the right questions because the reality is no one's trigger food is carrots, right? No one's trigger foods are green smoothies, right? And so I think today what we want to let you listeners know that there is a physiological thing to being triggered by foods, but there's also an emotional component there. And if this is something that really is a challenge for you, I really want to encourage you to listen to episode 62 with Sass Pethrick, where we talk about adaptive versus technical change. Because when I hear this question from people, the real question that I want to ask them is, why are you someone that gets triggered by food? Not how do I keep trigger foods away? How do I manage trigger foods? taking the power away from food and putting it back on you. Why am I someone who gets triggered by food? And that's a completely different question, because Juliet, don't you think most people, what's interesting about trigger foods is people can quote unquote resist them when they're doing something like a Whole30 or when they're on a diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not consistently triggered by them.
When they have the plan in place, when there's a control around it.
Exactly. So that gives you a clue of, hey, what's changed in my life? Not on my plan. Why do I go off the plan? Why do I get triggered to go off the plan? Is really the questions I want people to start to ask themselves, because this is about changing who you are and why you get triggered by certain foods. So,
and I think some people would say, like, when they are doing plan like that they sabotage themselves.
Yeah.
And that their trigger, if you ever notice, I had this with a client recently who said that they were doing a Whole30 actually, and their trigger food just changed. It was no longer cookies or whatever it was, but it then became nuts because that was all they were allowed to have on the plan. So then they ended up overeating that. They just substituted. So it's not the actual food itself, but it's the feeling behind the overeating of a food.
Yes, it's the emotion. There's some emotional trigger there. And that's what I think we need to talk about today, because we're not going to be able to solve it in this episode. I was with my Truth with Food clients. We have follow-up calls a month out after the program. And we were saying like how you really have to have this X-ray vision about what those emotional triggers are, because they're invisible, right? It's not like you could say, oh, this is what it is. Here's my menu of emotional triggers, but it's something that there's something in you that's feeling very threatened or vulnerable. And I think oftentimes on the surface, it's the restriction itself, right?
Yes.
A lot of the reason people have trigger foods at all is because they are restricted in your mind. And I think that's an important part, because what are some of the, Juliet, you brought up a great point. Some of the conventional wisdom around trigger foods is don't bring it into your house.
Just avoid it at all costs. If you bring it in, you're going to eat it. So just don't even buy it. Don't even order it.
Yeah. And that's part of the issue, is that for some reason you do not trust yourself around these foods. And so you're restricting yourself, which is what we resist persists. And I think the longer that I would love to see the equation of like the intensity that you restrict, how that equates to like the opposite binge. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like restriction is this tightness, and then you need to expand.
I know that was how it was for me. All of my binging was worse when I was telling myself that things were off limits, and then when I was shaming myself around it, it was a perpetual cycle. And every time I would shame myself more and try to put tighter parameters on it, I would have a larger binge and beat myself even worse.
Yes. So it's actually often the restriction itself that creates the trigger.
But then there's the opposite school of thought which is don't avoid it, have it all. The Janine Roth mentality, Women, Food, and God, which is, she talks about just going for it. All the trigger foods, all of the things that are gateways for you, just keep them in the house, have as much as you want, and then work through it in that way, almost like a cognitive behavioral exposure therapy.
Yeah. I know I had heard that when I was struggling, but that to me wouldn't have worked. I just wouldn't have done it.
You are. Yeah. With it, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, and also, I get that idea, but I had been basically like binging on that stuff for so long that at that point I was like, is this really, like, if I just give myself all of this, the fear of like gaining so much weight and being out of control just made me not even feel like that was a doable solution. And I'm really glad that I didn't, for me, because, and I know a lot of my clients, we really value health. And I'm not saying that can be healthy for a while. Everything is relative. But I think with the intensity of trigger foods, whether it's pizza or brownies, they are so sweet. They are so rich with like usually high fat, high sugar, that they light up that reward part of the brain. And you're going to crave them more and more, right? Like the more sugar you eat, the more you want. And I found that, from a physiological standpoint, helping people learn to balance their blood sugar really eliminates enough of that trigger that then you can get the space to figure out what emotionally is going on. Because sometimes it's both. And I wanted to give an example. And I ask my clients, just so everyone knows, whenever I share a pretty specific client example, I always ask them if I can get permission to share it, even though I often change some of the details because I think this will give you a really great example. So I had a client who, she was doing really well. And then it was President's Day and her kids had off. And she went with a friend to like have their kids like play, I forget. Oh, they were painting those, like, how you can paint, you can go and paint like those, everyone paints the same things.
Yeah. The paint by with like the drink and paint parties.
Yes. Yeah. So her friend was like, hey, let's have a glass of wine. And my client was like, all right. Like she didn't really want it, but she had it anyways. And then next thing she knew, they had like 3 bottles, like they finished the bottle. So she ended up having like 2 glasses, right? And then she went home, had a healthy dinner. And then she said, all of a sudden she found herself in the freezer eating the frozen Reese's peanut butter cups. And she was like, why was I triggered by that? And so I wanted to go like back through why she was triggered from that, so people can see how this is interplaying. So we realized that it was 2 things. Her blood sugar was imbalanced. So part of that craving and the need to eat that, the wine set off her blood sugar.
Which it often does for people.
Yes.
People think it's losing their inhibitions because they're feeling good and they have a buzz going, which could be part of it, right? Especially if you're somebody who's so tightly wound all the time and you're always restricting yourself. Just that little bit of permission from alcohol to kind of like let loose then sets you off into a binge, but it also definitely has a physiological response. So the 2 things together are not great. So if you can manage your blood sugar, then you only have to deal with one of those things.
Exactly. And she was saying how she had like a really, pretty healthy dinner. And then why do I do that? And so we went backwards and we realized that when your blood sugar isn't balanced, it makes you more emotional too, right? And when we looked at the course of that interaction, the reality was she didn't really want the wine. And when we started to dissect it emotionally, she also realized it kind of took away from the day, because rather than feeling really good about the day, she felt tired, a little down. And so on this, we were working on one of the stories of why she goes to food when she doesn't want to be eating it. And her story thread is around like, when I don't voice my needs because I don't want to look needy. And so she realized that the X-ray vision, why she was triggered by that, is she didn't voice her needs. And it felt really uncomfortable not to do that. There was a disconnect there. And so to not partly just kind of go with the flow, she had the wine when she didn't really need it to begin with. And so it was also that vulnerability that when she's triggered that way, she makes bad choices. And so that was who do I have to become to not be triggered by food isn't like a direct linear. It's not like something happened right before she went and had the Reese's peanut butter cup. It was something that was emotionally lingering and emotionally unaligned with who she was. And so those 2 things that came together at the evening triggered the Reese's PC cup experience.
So let's just go into it. That's an amazing scenario. And I feel like what insight that, you helped her have, because I know for a lot of people, they might not be able to have that kind of insight. It does help to work with a coach, someone like yourself to kind of see things and see your blind spots of what, there's something deeper here going on, and then asking the right questions. It's not that you told her what the answer was. She figured that out for herself.
Yeah. And this is kind of a plug for our retreat and for the workshops that I'm doing in LA, San Francisco, Philly, March 11th, LA, February 25th, and San Francisco, February 18th, and New York, or March 14th, is what is your true goal? And that's what we're going to be doing, because it is not, yes, you need to figure out what foods work for you, but you need to figure out what your story is that triggers you to make choices that you don't want to be making.
Yeah, so Allie's retreat is called A Path Forward.
Yeah, thank you. And we will be doing the Path Forward at the Insatiable Retreat in Philadelphia. And then Juliet's going to work us out afterwards so we can get clear and move through what we do. So that's the work that I do with clients. So we knew her story, the chronic tension in her story. And then that was a new way that it popped up, was in that scenario. And so she learned something new about herself that day. But yeah, that's what I think is so important when we talk about adaptive change is, why am I someone that gets triggered? And it's so nuanced because of what you said, Juliet. The blood sugar is like it could be one piece, it might not be one piece, right? And usually these physical and emotional things are interplaying together. And at the end of the day, when we talk about traditional advice, like don't have it in the house, food has become such a social lubricant for people that if it's not in your house, it's going to be at work, right?
Yeah, you cannot escape it.
Yeah. You cannot escape it. It's going to be at the Super Bowl party, or it's going to be at Valentine's Day dessert. And what it basically is it's going to be in all these situations, and you're going to have different things that you say to yourself, like, oh, I'm just going to take a bite, or diet starts tomorrow, or I just want to eat like everyone else, right? Like all these kind of good cop, bad cop, like conversations that we have in our head. But those are all resistance, and they're dressing up as how we feel emotionally about why we're triggered. We get triggered with something, and then because food is the most well-worn path in our mind, it's like, oh, I must be feeling uncomfortable about what I'm eating.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I remember, Ali, when we were working together many years ago, one of my goal that we had set was to see food as being not good, not bad, but neutral. That there's, and even to this day, sometimes I wish I saw food a little more good and bad now, because I'm so neutral about it that, I don't demonize everything anymore. Even something that's clearly like horrible for you doesn't mean I'm not eating it necessarily, but I just don't view food in that same way.
Well, but that's the paradox, right? And that's why I call my process Truce with Food. But in order for you to get out of that tension and that hell, you can't think of yourself as better or worse for eating well. So that's also why, being neutral, you then, it's not like it's either or, you make choices that are better aligned. And so that's really important. I mean, and I think what's you're illustrating though is you still eat relatively healthy, right? In fact, that was necessary. And because otherwise,
and if I don't eat healthy, it is what it is. There's nothing more to it. It's just something that I ate. It's just food. And, sometimes the consequences, I don't feel that great physically, mentally, emotionally, but it's not in the way of guilt, shame. I'm a bad person because I did this. Oh, look at me. I can't get ahead. It's none of that around it. None of those kinds of emotions.
Yeah. And because when those emotions are present, you can't really connect what you're eating to how you're feeling because you're so in your head. It's
exactly.
Like, you can't even get an accurate read. And that's why I'm also a big believer in like using blood sugar and gut health in tandem with the emotional stuff, because as you start to get healthier physically, you can no longer tolerate, you feel so good, you don't want to sabotage yourself anymore, right? But even though you're still doing it becomes less about being good or bad. It's just like, I want my life to be easier.
Yes. So
in terms of certain questions for people, I think, why am I someone that gets triggered, can be kind of hard to answer because it's, well, I'm always triggered, right? Or I'm always like, I've always been this way is often what I hear.
And that's still looking at the food as being the more powerful thing when that's your answer.
Yeah. So I wanted to give people contrasting things to think about. Like, so if you're on the Whole30, I love that example, Juliet, of you saying like their trigger food went from like whatever it was before, they restricted themselves and now they're doing, nuts. Some of my clients do dates, right? Dates are allowed, I think, on Whole30. But what happens is you don't want to look at what's going on in the plan. Think about what situation occurred. What in your environment has changed? Did you get a big project at work that feels overwhelming? Were you at a social situation where you were comparing yourself to other people and felt fat or invisible? Start looking at what changed in your environment.
Are you tired and burnt out?
Fantastic one. I can't tell you how many clients
99% of us just raise our hand. We live in America. You're tired and you're burnt out, and food is the drug of choice.
But it does give you energy, right?
Yeah.
that's like the tricky thing, right? But think about how did you, a lot of times, at least I know I did this when I would go or try the master cleanse or try Whole30 Whole30 I actually made it through, but other things, I also controlled my environment, right? Like I stopped going to social situations. Like I made sure to exercise. Like I was so rigid about everything. And then when things in my life stopped being rigid, like I couldn't get to the gym one day, or I couldn't eat my perfect lunch, that's when things started going off the rails. But it wasn't about the food. I had to look at what in my life emotionally started to feel very triggering. And I think that's what I want people to take away from more than anything in this episode is, yes, part of it is physiological. Take that away. And then emotionally, what has shifted and changed? And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And what about, Allie, for those who feel like they're in a perpetual state of overeating and it's more habitual? Like it's been something that's just years and years. It's a habit at this point wherever, for example, nighttime eating, right? It might not even be a trigger foods per se, but they have an uncontrollable sensation where like every night they snack and it's just it's a perpetual state of knowing that they're doing this thing that they shouldn't do, but they can't get out of it, the cycle.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's an adaptive challenge again, is why am I eating at night? And why am I someone who decides to eat a lot at night is the question. And I will tell you from experience from working with clients, a lot of nighttime eating is about being in private.
Elaborate on that more.
It's, maybe what's going through their mind is like, I've earned this, or it's my time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, even though they're judging themselves internally, it's external judgment-free zone of what I'm eating. They would never eat that if they because they wouldn't eat like that if they were at a party and it was at the nighttime. It's about it being in private and them being shamed because they're doing it. And that is an accumulation of the story so I should back up. So when you ask yourself, why am I someone who gets triggered by foods, or why am I someone who feels compelled to eat at night? You will see that there is a story, which is what I call your true goal, that creates this chronic tension that makes you feel vulnerable all day and exhausts you. And so by the time you get to evening, it is balancing out that chronic tension from the day. So some people will say, I get to reward myself. I made it through the day. Well, why do you get rewarded for that?
Why do you have to make it through the day?
Well, right. But why does your day feel so hard? Why does your day feel so triggering? And that's then when you start to realize that instead of developing resiliency skills, you've been eating your way through that. So there's a lot. Yeah.
Well, so this is how I felt when Allie and I talked about this. I don't even know how many years ago now, but it was like, holy shit, because we all think it's about the food and the food controls us. And, it has nothing to do with the food itself. The food is just simply how we're expressing our discomfort.
Exactly.
You could choose alcohol. You could choose to chain smoke. You could choose to have sex with, strangers. I mean, there are people who do other things other than food, but it all has the same charge around it.
It does. And what I love and think the challenge is around food is that you have to eat. So you can't just perpetuate the all or nothing cycle, right? Mm-hmm. You can't say, I'm never going to eat again. You have to, if you choose the invitation, it can be the biggest invitation into your power. Because what you're saying, because in essence, when you feel like your day is triggering, when you feel like your day is draining, you've given your power elsewhere. You feel like life is just coming at you rather than you having choice.
So I love this, and I want to elaborate a little bit, if you can, Allie, on the accumulation of emotional triggers during the day, like not food triggers, but the emotional triggers throughout the day that are then making you feel like you have these trigger foods. So how can people work on actually feeling their feelings throughout the day and being able to, have some resiliency with that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you have to do is even start to understand that you're having a feeling. And this is really hard for my clients. This was so hard for me because they're used to being in their heads. And many of us, when we feel the slightest bit of discomfort emotionally, we retreat to our heads and we overanalyze. So if people are out there what you want to start to do, I mean, I know people are out there listening, but for people who want to try this, that's what I meant to say. When your mind starts to go to food, start to say during the day, when you start thinking about food, when you start to feel what clients often call that automatic pilot, you're not going to catch it at first. This takes practice, but you want to say, wait, I'm having some sort of trigger right now. And in the beginning, you just have to say that because you have to stop yourself. Because this is what's hard is it's invisible. And so we have to create some distance from it. We have to be able to see it first. And people really are so convinced that they love food this much, or they think about food all the time because they're chronically feeling emotionally upset or discomfort for various reasons. But I think asking them, saying to themselves in the beginning, like, okay, I'm thinking about food. What else is going on here? What just happened? Did I get an uncomfortable email? Am I dreading the task that I have to do? What is happening here?
So even if you can identify those things, right? So you're dreading the task that you have to do, for example.
Yeah.
It doesn't make that task go away.
No.
So then once you identify what it is, you have to work through how to work through it.
Yes. And that's the internal feeling. So what am I feeling? And it's important to identify the feeling because your story comes from what you think that feeling means. So for most perfectionists, anything less than guns blazing confidence, they're worried about failing. So it's not the feeling of, I don't know what to do. It's, I think that means that I'm going to fail or I'm going to do, and they're not thinking failure. They might think, what if I do the wrong thing? What if I say the wrong thing? Right. And on the first level, it's our body. Like, what if I look the wrong way? What if I get passed over because I look the wrong way and so I'm unimportant? Right? Those are like, on the surface, it's about our body, but it's so much more about these deeper things that we often have tolerated and normalized. We don't even realize that our day doesn't have to be stressful. It can be meaningful. It doesn't mean it's not hard. I think you and I, Juliet, I think we know better than anyone, like how running a business is rough. I mean, but would you do anything else at this point? Like I wouldn't.
No, I don't think I could. I don't think I would do well with such restriction, especially for me. Part of having a business and being an entrepreneur is having that freedom of time, even though all my time is taken. But it's just knowing that I have the freedom of time versus, having to be somewhere at a certain time and then you can't leave until a certain time is very imprisoning to me. I don't like that feeling.
Well, what you're describing is I want choice.
Choice, exactly. But not to say that you don't have that choice if you are working in a more corporate structured environment. You have the ability to voice your opinion and your feelings if you want to take a break or if you need more than what you're getting.
Yeah. And it's also choice that people don't even realize that they have, right? It doesn't mean, because most of my clients are not entrepreneurs. They do not have their own businesses. They work in very traditional structures, but they realize they have a choice in how they want to manage their teams, in the projects that they choose, and how they're going to even show up. Like some feel like they have to do everything, right? And you start getting better just the same way that people think if they work hard, they're going to lose weight. It's like, no, not all effort yields results. You have to know how to work smart, not hard.
Yeah.
Right. And people start to realize that they can work or be much smarter in their days once they know they have different choices. But you don't know you have that choice until you know that. Often people don't know that they're making choices, right? Like they're on automatic pilot, not just with food, but like, no, this is how the boss wants it, or this is how it is, or this is how I have to study for my upcoming exam. And just because everyone else is doing it, doesn't mean that that's the best way. This brings up this deeper thing, and that's it's a process. And we're going to talk about this in the workshop, but you first have to even understand that it's not about the food all the time. Because what's tricky is sometimes your blood sugar is unbalanced. That's why I like to get people's blood sugar in balance, because then they can get a much clearer read on their emotional state. But just slowing down and starting to realize what's triggering me. And I will tell you a couple things that my clients say is, especially when they can't even name the feeling, it's when they go in crisis mode. like something has to be figured out right away. That's when they know they're in a story. That's when they know they don't feel like they have a choice. Some clients describe it as like tornado of thoughts, just like, oh my God, the thoughts are swirling. Other people use the term overdrive, like, oh my God, or like over analyzing. So those are the spaces. And you'll start to notice once you start to, if you can clearly identify your story, you start to realize how often that happens, not just around food.
Okay, you bring up an amazing point, which is because everybody's always on hyperdrive, overdrive, tornado of thoughts swirling, and that can trigger them to overeat. At the same point, those are the people who are most afraid of having downtime, because what will they do with that downtime? Eat, right? I'm afraid to have, hours in my house without anything to do because all I'm going to do is snack, or I don't want to work from home. I've heard this before, because if I work from home, I'm just going to nosh all day long. I won't be able to stop eating.
Exactly. And that, again, it's not
really interesting paradox,
Well, and that's why you have to get out of that cycle, right? That's why you really have to understand, why am I someone who gets triggered? Because the person who says, I don't want to work from home, is it really working from home, or is it that it's in private? And now they feel like, work probably stresses them out, but what is it about being in private? And that's what's challenging about emotional eating in this cycle is it's not a linear relationship. Right? Like, again, like with my client with the Reese peanut butter cups, it wasn't something that happened right then. Like, she got the kids to bed. It was a great evening, and she was like, why am I eating this? Like, why am I not eating this? Like, I don't want it, but I'm eating it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you really have to understand this X-ray, it's almost like having Jedi skills to like know what's really going on and the subtext there. And that takes time because we've normalized the going. And then we fear downtime when that's actually often exactly what we need. But that's why if you really, the Truths with Food process is so powerful, because when you really understand what your goal is, first of all, it makes you feel more eased and relaxed, because you're like, now I know why nothing else has worked. I haven't tried everything. I tried the same things, but they were all just trying to educate me more about nutrition or to learn a better system, when really I needed to learn myself and my own emotional responses. And when you heal that relationship to food, because how you eat is how you live, everything in your life gets easier. And you become more resilient and more powerful. And then you start to see choices before that you didn't even know existed. But it's challenging, right? This process is not for everyone. It's people who really, they want to have results and enjoy them too. Because a lot of people can lose weight, right? By avoiding trigger foods, not bringing them in. But then they spend all their success worrying about losing it.
All their success worrying about losing it and worried about not gaining it back. And then it's, there's only so much energy that we have as human beings of what we can focus on and think about. So how do you want to spend your energy on this planet? Do you want to spend it thinking about how fat your ass is and, not and being afraid of eating an entire bag of tortilla chips? Or do you want to make a difference in the world and, actually show up and be who you're truly meant to be?
Yeah. And I will tell you, and you can, a lot of my clients are in very big roles in their work. They are women in male-dominated fields in leadership. They are in the healthcare system themselves. They run nonprofits. They work in social justice. And it is very classic to wear themselves into the ground, right? Just in the nature of the roles that they're in. And this process enables them to be more effective, not only because they feel better, because they feel more empowered through their body. And then that translates into, it's a mindset, right? And you bring yourself wherever you go, but it makes their work so much more impactful, because they're not the same things that used to stress them out. They now work through, and you get so much better results when you just go head into something, right? With tools and skills and stuff like that. So I love that you asked that, because I know working through my own battle with food was one of the greatest birth canals I've ever been through. I keep using the word birth canal, but it was a total transformation and process of genuinely changing who I was and how I see the world. So that's with trigger foods. That's what I want people to think about. One kind of really tactical thing though, aside from what in my environment changes, what triggers me, is there is that physiological piece. And I found that as I was working through my relationship with food, that making sure that the sugary foods that I love, I'm a sugar person, had healthy fats in it, helped me limit how much I ate, right? Because I used to think that all calories were equal. And I was like, why am I not getting full from all these trigger foods, right? Like I've eaten thousands of calories. But when you eat healthy fats with the sugar, it definitely helps you get fuller faster.
If sugar is the thing that is your trigger, everyone, because I know, well, nuts, for example, if you're just straight eating nuts, that didn't sound right. I mean, there is something sweet about them though. So I would say for something like that, pair it with protein because nuts are all fat. Great so if you're having one macronutrient, like it's sugar or it's just fat, if you pair it, it does help because again, we're trying to create balance and that balance can stimulate a little bit more a feeling of satiation and like completeness with what you're eating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like some roasted, chicken with a bunch of almonds or cashews or whatever it is that's triggering you, try to have like something like that with it.
Yeah. And, and while you're doing that, ask yourself, like, why am I being triggered here? And the answer is not going to come right away. Perfectionists and people who struggle with food tend to like want to know right away. It's going to take some time for the answer to pop up. But the more that you ask it, the faster the answer comes. One of the biggest measurements, I'm all about measurements. I just want people to be measuring the right things and putting their effort. Like, this is hard work. I just want them to be working in the right direction. But one of the biggest things that we measure in Truths with Food is how quickly are you catching your story? How quickly are you labeling what's going on? How are you working through it? And in the beginning with clients, it takes them like a week or two, and they have to come to the coaching calls and we dissect it. We do what we did with the Reese Peanut Butter Cup. But then, I was just on a call and all of them, I've been catching it right. And eventually your cravings don't even exist. Like one client was like, I don't even go to alcohol anymore. I can't believe this. And the other client was like, I grabbed nuts at the bowling alley with my kid. And then I was like, wait, what's happening? And she was able to figure it out in 3 seconds, threw the nuts away and like course corrected what she had to do. Her kids were going crazy and she had to send a text message to another parent, felt good, controlled the situation, and like it was done. So measure how much more quickly you're able to, in the beginning, just knowing to ask yourself that and starting to say, what am I feeling internally? Don't look at the surroundings. It's what is this trigger in me? Not what the person said in the email, but what is this making me feel like? What am I fearing here?
And just to go with that, when you identify the feelings, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to do the thing that you're trying to do. It's going to be there's a definite, I don't say a learning curve, but
no, it is.
It takes time. And even those of us who are aware and can identify the feelings, you're then making the choice though to do the thing. And it's okay. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're not going to work through this. That's all part of it.
Yeah.
You'll do it until you don't do it anymore. And there will be a point where if you are working on yourself emotionally and asking these deeper questions, you will find yourself not doing it all of a sudden. And it's not like this transformative, like, oh my God, it really is so subtle that you're like, wait, looking back, I didn't do that thing that I normally do. That's weird. So it doesn't happen. So like, it's not like this revolutionary thing that occurs.
Right. But it is kind of like magical because what you're describing is so spot on. You're actually simplifying your life. When you get to these deeper root issues, you have less rules and less rebellion and less restriction, which is what causes the triggering in the first place. And I actually, when I was first like really working with clients, I realized a really important piece of the process is them realizing that they can eat quote unquote imperfectly and not gain weight. Like that really challenges a perfectionist mindset when it's like, wait, I wasn't perfect and nothing. Like some of my clients who lose weight, they're amazed that like they're losing weight without exercising and not being on a plan and they're still eating ice cream or fries. And it's like, yeah, it's like, you don't have to be perfect. And so that's even living through that lived experience helps reduce that triggering because so much of triggering is about what you can't have or you don't think you can have. So I think we're done. Do you have any more questions?
No, I'm so happy we did this episode because I know it's something that a lot of our listeners have on their minds. So thank you guys for listening, and please go onto our Facebook page. It's just /Insatiable Podcast on Facebook. And we would love for you guys to comment on there and ask any questions that you might have about episodes. Let's start to open the conversation and let us know if you have any requests for episodes. This episode today came from one of our listeners, so thank you. And we have a retreat coming up in March in Philadelphia. Allie and I are really looking forward to that.
I'm so excited. You can find the details at allieshapiro.com /insatiable retreat. And I will be taking everyone through this process to figure out what your story is that triggers you. It's almost impossible to figure out on your own, just so you know. But you can start to ask those questions. So come. And if you're not in Philadelphia, again, I'll be in LA at the Springs, super cool venue in downtown LA, in San Francisco and New York. And you can go to allieshapiro.com /a path forward workshop for that.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening to the Insatiable Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on social media. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Juliet Unite, and Allie at Allie M. Shapiro. M stands for Marie. Please feel free to also email us any questions. We would love to hear from all our listeners. You can reach us at allieshapiro.com and Juliet at unitefitness.com. We'll see you next time.